Hello and welcome back to another episode of Taking Control of Cancer with me, Steve Bland, and this podcast is, as always, brought to you by the North East London Cancer Alliance. Before we get into this week's episode, I just want to give a special shout out to anybody listening on Bedrock Radio, on DAB Digital Radio, and in local hospitals across North East London and Southwest Essex. Thank you so much for tuning in. You're more than welcome. And I really hope you enjoyed this episode, which, when we're talking about taking control of cancer, this is an area that you can do just that. We're talking about prehabilitation, often known as prehab, and how it can support people before, during, and after cancer treatment. Now, to talk about prehab and tell me all about the amazing work going on right here in North East London, I'm joined by Andriana Petrova, who's a highly specialist prehabilitation dietitian, Duncan Grant, who's a senior exercise physiologist, and Emily Dore-Smith, who's a highly specialist prehabilitation physiotherapist, all three from Barts Health NHS Trust. So thank you all so much for joining me. I want to start by setting the scene a little bit. Let's just explain to people perhaps who haven't heard the term prehab before. What are we talking about when we're talking about prehabilitation? Who wants to tackle that one for us?
I can start and you guys can jump in.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, well, prehabilitation really is all about preparing for treatment and getting as ready as possible for cancer treatment, whether that's surgery, whether that's chemotherapy or immunotherapy. And it's about, a holistic approach and getting ready from a nutritional point of view, from a fitness point of view, but also from our psychological well-being. With prehabilitation, that's our three sort of main pillars. And we know that people who are fitter, so people who are exercising, who are stronger, people who are nutritionally well, and from a mental well-being, they feel quite good, quite well, then they tend to have better outcomes, more likely to tolerate the chemotherapy better, and they can have quicker recovery after surgery. And prehabilitation really is about empowering people and empowering patients to get the best outcomes, get ready for treatment, and recover as well as possible. That's sort of in a snapshot, I'd say.
That sounds good. I think it's something. I don't know how long you guys have been doing this for, but it feels like it's, I want to say, relatively new. Maybe, when my just a bit of background. My first wife died from breast cancer about 8 years or so ago, but she was diagnosed in 2016. I don't really remember ever being spoken to about prehab, or people talked about exercise and keeping yourself healthy, but I don't remember it being an actual service. It's anything that she could actually go and do, or classes she could join or anything like that. So how recent are we talking? Is it something that's last 5 years? Has it kind of just exploded in terms of people understanding the value of all this?
So I think the concept of prehab probably first came around 2010 sort of thing, when it was about preparing for surgery, but we didn't know the value as much. And over the last the first Macmillan guidance came out in 2018, I believe, and that's when we sort of started seeing the value. But it was very much a recommendation. We know it's good, but there wasn't really many services sort of offering something people can access, somewhere people can go and ask for help. And over the last, probably a couple of years, 5 years, the evidence has really grown. There's a lot more research happening. So we know a lot more with more certainty now the benefits of this. And with the research coming out, obviously that translates into recommendations, national plan. Prehab is now included in the sort of NHS cancer plan. So I think all of that provides sort of support for different hospitals and different services to start offering that in a more structured approach, and for people to be able to access it.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think as a trust that we work in, we're sort of offering one of the largest services in the country. There's various other hospitals offering sort of different prehabilitation services, but I think we really like to retain the sort of face-to-face, one-to-one input alongside, how the service is going to have to move to cope unfortunately more numbers as people come through, not often just now on curative pathways of treatment, but those perhaps that may be on more palliative pathways of treatment. We want to be able to offer them our support and kind of expertise to optimize them as best as they can through their sort of treatment journey as well. But you're right, it's very much more a recent thing that the rehab and rehabilitation is very well known in, you know, many other specialities, orthopedics and recovering from things, sort of neurological events like strokes. But I think thinking in cancer care, I think it is definitely a newer concept to patients and to educate people what that means and what they can do, as Andy said, to sort of empower themselves and take control at a time which very much feels like is out of their control, and the sort of uncertainty that surrounds that.
Yeah, our medical treatments are improving. People are living longer after cancer diagnosis. And what prehab does is we're thinking beyond just those outcomes, you know, okay, we're controlling your cancer. Prehab gives people the opportunity to think about their quality of life, get stronger, and actually maintain some quality of life, or good quality of life, hopefully, during those treatments. Because, you know, 20, 30 years ago, I think that the outcomes weren't as good as now. But now it's about living with those diagnoses, living well, not just being alive.
Yeah, it's huge, isn't it? And so how early in a sort of post-diagnosis would you guys start to see, Duncan? How early after someone finds out they have cancer, how early do you see them to get a plan in place?
Yeah, so I mean, with prehab, time is of the essence. So the earlier, the better for us. The more time we have to sort of work with patients to build up their strength and fitness and address any nutritional and psychological concerns. Yeah, more time is generally better. So it's, I mean, sometimes we've even had contact the day that they have received the diagnosis. So we have been previously a part of that clinic. Sometimes it can even be before they've got a diagnosis, and it might be that they have a suspicion of cancer. Essentially, the more time we have with patients, the better.
We have here, a dietitian, physiologist, physiotherapist. Obviously, there's a lot goes into the prehab team. Just talk me through. I presume you guys are not it. There's a wider team as well. What goes into prehab? Emily, perhaps cover that one. What goes into a prehab team?
The prehab teams can look quite different, again, depending on where you work in a kind of hospital setting that we're in, you know, a large trust that Barts is, and a kind of a big locality that we cover as well, whereas other services that may be more kind of community-based, again, their sort of makeup of their team might look a bit different. But for ourselves, we've got 4 exercise physiologists. Duncan's our senior exercise physiologist. We've got Andy as our dietitian. We've got Lucy, our occupational therapist, and then myself as the physiotherapist. And I think although we sort of work obviously very closely with one another, our roles have got those specifics to them. So Andy obviously very much supports from a nutritional basis, and patients that may have lost weight or are struggling to eat through various reasons, she can really help sort of get that early intervention in prior to them sort of going into hospital. I tend to see some of the post-operative patients, for example, your breast patients that may be sort of recovering post-surgery, optimizing them for their radiotherapy and any other treatment they may have upcoming. Lucy, our occupational therapist, she kind of supports people managing fatigue, which is huge in the cancer population. About 70% of people will experience, sort of higher levels of fatigue. And also from a mental well-being point of view, she can give sort of strategies, support, onward referrals to psychology as well, if that's necessary. And then our exercise physiologist, Duncan, you're probably better at kind of giving an overview of you guys.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the clue's in the name, but everything exercise we do. So, I mean, a typical day for us would be like assessing a patient's fitness and then coming up with a tailored exercise program for that patient. Depending on where the patient's at, we might sort of give different levels of support, but where it's needed, we will provide one-on-one exercise sessions to the patient.
And how closely do you guys work with the guys working on the chemotherapy, the guys working on the immunotherapy, the actual medical team that the patient is dealing with? How closely do you guys work with them?
I think we work quite closely. I mean, firstly, we obviously patients, in order for patients to access our service, we've got to have really good relationships with all those teams, because the the nurses who work with the consultants, they know the patients best. They speak to them really, really often. Patients trust them. So we'd often get referrals from the nurses. Sometimes it might be the consultant that sees the patient and sort of say, oh, you will really benefit from seeing sort of the prehab team. But also, patients that are going through chemotherapy, they might have sort of red flags. They might not be well when they come for a session. So us working with the team is really important so we can flag these things, make sure people get the support that they need. I think that's something we really see with our patients that are on treatment, because with prehab, yes, we want to start seeing people before, but we support them during their journey, during their treatment. So we do need to adapt everything from the advice we give. They might need a medication review from the team. Sometimes we've had to, send people to A&E. They become really unwell because of their chemotherapy side effects during an exercise session. So I think we've got to work really closely. Yeah,
I think we work quite hard at that. As I said previously, Barts is a big site. There's lots of medical surgical teams across the 5 different hospitals. So I think having that good relations with consultants and the CNSs that support those teams, we're in sort of regular contact. And as I said, the clinical nurse specialists are key and are sort of real allies in terms of referring into the service. And again, to have really good consultant buy-in is so important for us. And we're really lucky that, many of the teams, do give that at Barts, which is great.
Yeah.
And Duncan, so you've got a patient, they've just been diagnosed with cancer. As we know, their life's just been turned upside down, and then they come and see you, and you start talking about exercise and saying, what kind of response do you get from the patients? Because it's a really difficult time, isn't it, for them, in the immediate, finding a symptom even before they've been diagnosed, or in the immediate aftermath of a diagnosis. How receptive are they to what you're trying to do, or are they straight away just, some of them, I imagine, a mindset of just, I want to do whatever I can to try and help?
Yeah, I mean, you obviously get a bit of a mix, but I would say the vast majority are quite motivated and quite receptive to I guess, the word exercise. I definitely find that, we have to sort of meet patients where they're at. And, a part of that is we get them in for an assessment. We have a good long chat to them, get a bit of their history. So we sort of have a bit of an idea of where they are exercise-wise. And then we do a couple of exercise tests with them just to see where they are at functionally. I think we're quite lucky within the BART service that we do get a bit of time to spend with patients that we feel do need the support. There's obviously different levels of support that some patients need. We might get a patient that's been a regular gym goer. They're not scared of the word exercise. They already were in a good routine. They just found out about cancer and they were a bit unsure of what to do, and likely they probably stopped exercising because they just didn't know what they should be doing. And so for patients like that, it might just be like a bit of a brief interaction with us and just giving them the okay that, yes, you should be exercising and here are a few things you could do. But definitely we do get a lot of patients that need that extra support. And as I said before, we're very lucky here that we can provide that one-on-one support with the patients that need it the most.
So many different things, different people, doesn't it? Like you say, you might have someone who's like a proper gym goer, just it's already part of their life. But I imagine you see plenty of people who that's not the case for. Maybe they're in their 70s or their 80s, or maybe carrying a bit too much extra weight, and exercise has not been a big thing for them, at that point. And then we know how difficult chemo is in terms of what you can actually do. So what exercise, I imagine it's not the same thing for everybody, is it? Like it might just be going for a walk. It might just be something that sounds quite simple to some people.
Absolutely. And this is where we really got to individualize the advice that we give the patient. We have exercise recommendations that are, I guess, quite general, and they are something that we should try to work towards. But again, after meeting a patient, having a bit of a chat to them and seeing where they're currently at, you're right. For some patients, it might be just mobilizing or getting up and down from a chair, something as simple as that. Every patient's very, very different. So it's, I guess, a big part of our job is just, meeting the patients where they're currently at and looking at sort of what goals we can help them achieve.
I think culturally as well, the sort of population here, the family members, and sometimes having interpreters again to kind of convey the message and the importance is really key, to kind of get them on board from the beginning, because as you said, for some people that's never been ever a part of their life, or the most part. So that behavior change as quickly, as early as possible is really kind of key in that respect.
Yeah, I would say, when the patient's hearing the word exercise from lots of different professions, from the surgeon to the oncologist to the nurses through to us, it certainly helps with getting people on, getting the buy-in from patients.
And the same thing I imagine applies to nutrition as well, because you'll probably see I spoke to somebody a couple of weeks ago for an episode actually on nutrition. We spoke to someone who said as soon as they were diagnosed, they immediately went vegan and started cutting like all sugar out of the diet, and just went, maybe what some people would think is fairly extreme. But I imagine you see some people who have really lovely, healthy diets already, but then there'll be some people who will be at the other end of the diet spectrum.
Yeah, and I think it's really difficult because with nutrition it can get really complex really quickly, because everyone thinks they're an expert. And actually what might be the recommendation sort of before starting treatment can be very different for somebody who is on chemotherapy. So yeah, I do mostly see people who are struggling with eating. So people who maybe have lost weight without trying, or they've lost their appetite. And I help them sort of put on weight and make sure they're eating enough so that when they're exercising, they're building muscle, they're not burning more calories, because we're going to be supporting people to stay strong during treatment. There's a lot also though around exactly what you said. People get diagnosed and they immediately go on the internet and kind of look at what should I eat to help me with my cancer, or what should I avoid often. People want something to either add to their diet or to remove from their diet, again I think to kind of take control. And it can get really extreme, and there's just so many different things that actually I've seen people who have lost weight and muscle because of restricting too much. Because they're trying to be really healthy. People want control and they know that they can do something with food. And often here in the NHS, it's hard. You don't see a dietitian until you're really struggling.
Yeah.
Whereas we're very lucky with our prehab service. We've got quick access. We can be really proactive and actually prevent this before it happens. So if people are unsure what to eat, we can offer them a session. We can talk about where they're at, what their diagnosis is. And yes, if they can eat well, we can talk about a healthy diet, lots of fiber, lots of fruits and vegetables. But if they are struggling, then we can adjust it to make sure that they're getting the right nutrients before they're really struggling with sort of their weight, if that makes sense. So we've got that proactive approach, and hopefully access to sort of evidence-based information, so people don't, because there's just, I hear about a new miracle diet every day. And the aim really changes. Like when your first diagnosis is one thing, then people start treatment and start getting side effects. So then we need to tailor things to that. And if people sort of finish treatment and are living beyond cancer, then again, we're looking at the kind of a healthier approach. But it differs.
Yeah. So when we're talking about diet specifically, then I know all your approaches will be individualized to that patient, but are there some general diet changes, nutritional changes that we can tell people that if they're listening to this and they've recently been diagnosed, there are some sort of catch-all things that people should be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main thing tends to be so a cancer diagnosis can make our body need sort of more protein. People are prone to losing muscle mass. So when people have cancer diagnosis, we recommend increasing their protein intake. So making sure they've got some protein in their breakfast, lunch and dinner. If they're having snacks, making sure that has protein in it. And so that could be anything from sort of eggs, chicken, fish, lentils, beans, nuts, dairy products, milk alternatives, there's no right or wrong type of protein, shall we say. And we generally don't recommend actively trying to lose weight at the moment during treatment, even if people are living in sort of, they might be carrying a little bit of extra weight, but actually exercising and turning that into muscle will be more beneficial than trying to lose weight, because of those higher needs that I was talking about. The body needs energy and needs protein. So yeah, if somebody is listening to this and they've recently had a new diagnosis, if they're well, if they have no problems eating, then just a healthy, balanced diet, a little bit of everything, lots of fruit and vegetables and high fiber foods, lots of protein. But if somebody is struggling with their appetite, then trying to have almost a little bit more unhealthy diet, higher calorie foods, like choosing full fat yogurts instead of diet yogurts, adding extra cheese to meals, having peanut butter and toast, for example, because if somebody has poor appetite, they've got to get the most they can from small amounts of food, and just trying to stay strong, keep their weight up. I don't know if that's sort of...
Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about. Yeah.
Because what I don't want to say is sort of eat a really healthy, balanced diet, but then someone hears this and they're really struggling and they end up losing more weight. We know is sort of, if people are losing weight, it's more often muscle than anything else after a diagnosis.
And that's where Duncan comes in to get their muscle up.
Exactly. So we need to be
Duncan, same kind of question to you. Like, I know it's all individualized, but are there some general principles that everybody should be thinking about post diagnosis, and then we'll go into post operative as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, there are general guidelines for exercise, and surprisingly, they actually, if you've been diagnosed with cancer, they aren't that different to if you're just a regular healthy person. So the guidelines say that you should do about 150 minutes a week of moderate sort of intensity cardiovascular exercise. So how we can sort of think of that is, if you're doing something like walking or cycling, swimming, rowing, you should be going at a pace where you're getting a little bit out of breath. Maybe you can hold a conversation. You might not be able to sing, but you should be noticing that you're breathing a little bit heavier than you would have otherwise been. On top of that, you should also be doing some strength training. Again, muscle is quite important to help you get through treatments. If we're thinking of a surgery, people often lose quite a bit of muscle after surgery as well. So, I mean, I often tell patients it's almost like you want to be a bodybuilder before you go into your surgery. You want to build as much muscle as you can. But also, I know there's a bit of a high rocks trend at the moment, and having good cardiovascular fitness will help you get through that surgery quite well as well. So it's a bit of both, bit of the cardio and the strength training is really, really important for most people.
And Emily, this isn't just like peripheral stuff, is it? This is stuff that's genuinely going to impact, how well you tolerate your treatment, how much treatment you can have, how well you recover from an operation before you can start your treatment again. This is really important.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, it does seem like sort of basic generic advice that you're given, but when you, again, kind of for patients, you look at the emerging sort of scientific literature that supports this, and actually, as Andy and Duncan have both said, the more muscle mass you have, the thoughts around sort of your chemo being metabolized better and you coping with side effects for staying, physically active. I think historically, and this is again changing patients' kind of views and sort of attitudes towards resting while going through treatment, we're very much sort of moving away from that. But yeah, you're right. There's lots of evidence to support actually staying fitter sort of pre and during treatment means you don't have that huge sort of downturn after you've come through your operation or at the end of your treatment. Actually, you're sort of still at a higher functioning baseline had you not have put in this work and sort of had that support given to you. So yeah, it's very much, as I said, sort of supported in the scientific evidence, which is why it's now become sort of part within the cancer plan.
That was my next question, actually. What is the evidence? Like, how do we know that this is really important? Like, what does evidence tell us about the impact of exercise, the impact of diet, that kind of thing on outcomes?
think we've got a lot of evidence. So in surgery, we definitely have a lot of evidence. It's probably because that's where, historically, that's where prehab came from. Was, we know surgeries, it takes time to recover. It's quite, it's a stress, it's an insult to the body, and then you need rehabilitation afterwards. So we know that it's almost like a marathon. The fitter you are before you run the marathon, and the more, people carb load, etc., they recover better on the other side. So we've got, a fair few kind of large randomized control trials, and really showing that actually altogether kind of eating enough, and that's, I think it's key with surgery, it's actually having enough food, not dieting too much, exercising and being strong, being in a mentally in a good place, because it's quite nerve-wracking going in for treatment. Really helps with the reduction of length of stay. I think the combination of the three, there's evidence that at least a day less length of stay after surgery, less complications. But, we're thinking about going back to normality after as well. I think with chemo and immunotherapy, it's emerging almost with chemotherapy. I don't know, from an exercise point of view, I constantly see new papers on LinkedIn about sort of the evidence of exercise and nutrition, and kind of the whole trio on sort of tolerance, cardiac toxicity, a really good point. I think in breast cancer, it's emerging, but exercise and muscle mass may be linked to how well the cancer responds. We know definitely that muscle mass helps metabolize the chemotherapy, so naturally people have less side effects. So we've got good evidence, fairly strong, certainly from the surgical point of view, and from chemotherapy and other treatments. It's emerging. It's a bit harder to prove, I think, because they're ever changing.
Yeah.
The treatments are changing and evolving, and the medications are evolving, but we know that it does impact and it helps.
You talked a bit about mental health there. How obviously being happy and positive and bouncing around isn't going to, in of itself cure your cancer. But if you exercise is a big factor, isn't it, in terms of making us feel better?
Yeah.
And then maybe we're gonna then eat better, and then deal with anxieties better, deal with the overwhelm of a cancer diagnosis better. How impactful do you think it is on mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're struggling with your mental health, you're going to be struggling to come in for our sessions in particular. You're probably not going to be eating as well either. When you're struggling with your mental health, it can be quite difficult to even get out of bed. And if you're thinking of, trying to get through treatment, bed rest is like the worst thing you can be doing. So I think, it may even be the most important element of prehab, having good mental health so you can sort of engage in, these other healthy lifestyles to sort of get you through. So, our occupational therapist plays a really important role within our prehab service, supporting our patients with their mental well-being.
I think you guys as well. I think it's a bit of a cycle. Obviously, having that support from Lucy, our occupational therapist, really helps for the engagement. I think coming in and see you guys and having that time and support and reassurance. As you said already, exercise does have a benefit on mental health. So it's sort of a cycle where things are helping each other. And I think that's why it's so important that prehab, if we look at the definition, it has to be multimodal. So just getting some exercise support on its own, or a referral just for exercise, wouldn't be considered prehabilitation. There needs to be an element of all three levels, or all three pillars, because they work together so well. And to get really those benefits, you need a bit of everything.
And I think, Emily, as well, it's the feeling probably of you being able to do something about a situation where so much is out of your control, isn't it, after a cancer diagnosis? And I think it's really important for people in these little areas, not little areas, that's the wrong word, but in these areas where you actually can do something to help, actually doing something, taking a bit of control back.
Sure. And it's a big thing to comprehend when you're going through tests and there's a sort of not a confirmed cancer diagnosis, but that word has been mentioned, and already that kind of anxiety and worry and uncertainty is in patients' minds. And then when they do receive that diagnosis, for some patients, it is a lot to comprehend. And I think partly normalizing that everything seems to move very quickly, which obviously is in the patient's best interests. And, it does. They have a lot of appointments, and we try as best we can to kind of link in with those appointments and reduce that burden on the patient through seeing different professionals. Being that we do sort of cover 4 out of the 5 hospitals at Barts, we really try to kind of, from an equity point of view, and reach many patients as possible. But yeah, it's kind of listening to them, normalizing that, patients that we've had gone through our service, we do have a couple of sort of patient advocates that are great to kind of input on our service at times. But yeah, it's a big undertaking, but that, I think, with the right support is sort of lessened, and yeah, can help patients in that way.
With the intensity of a cancer treatment at times can be pretty big. Do you get like full buy-in from patients, or is it sometimes you need to kind of really convince them that there is stuff they can do outside of going for their chemotherapy, which I imagine just that in of itself is incredibly overwhelming and difficult? Do you have a bit of work to do to say that's really important, but so is this?
Yeah, I'd say absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I find that my first interaction with all the patients, I kind of feel like a little bit of a salesman at times, because I'm trying to sell a lot of what we're trying to do with the patients. When you've just had a diagnosis, all of a sudden you're it's not uncommon for a patient to be asking, why am I coming in for exercise now?
Yeah.
How is that relevant? So there is a lot of education that comes in from not only like the patient, but sometimes like other colleagues that it might not be front and center for them. Prehab. So there's absolutely a selling component, but I do find it's probably an element of the the cohort of people that we're working with. But when you've had a cancer diagnosis and you do have a big surgery coming up, there is not almost like an element of fear, which can help with motivation and seeking support. Yeah,
I actually was going to ask about education of colleagues, because as we know, a cancer workforce is made up of all different kinds of people. Some very receptive to new ideas, some less so, all different ages, experiences. Do you find there is an element you have to educate some of your colleagues at times?
I think we do a lot of that,
Yeah,
don't we? We
yeah.
sort of go to MDTs a lot. Presentations, audit meetings, sort of working on creating posters for like the clinic rooms, patient leaflets. But it makes a big difference, because I think if all the cancer workforce and beyond, if all GPs, everybody was kind of giving the same message, then people hear it very early on. And I mean, I can think of at least a couple of patients where we really struggle to sort of book them in to even come and see us. But actually having that message come from their primary team, from the CNS and the surgeon, who sort of said, I'll be operating on you, but this is what you can do to actually improve your outcomes. I'll do my best, but actually this prehabilitation is in your control. And that shifted it immediately, and the patient called and was like, right, I'm ready to come and see you. Whereas coming from us, it's not always the same. And it's understandable. People trust their nurse, trust their doctor. So
I would say with the educating our colleagues on what we do, that I would say it's generally well received, and all the clinicians that we work alongside with are quite on board with what we're trying to achieve with their patients. I think we, as clinicians, we've got our own specific roles and things that we're trying to do with the patients, and I guess with prehab coming in as a new part of the treatment pathway, it might not be front and center in their mind. So generally, when we're educating our colleagues, it's just letting them know that we're here, we can support their patients, rather than being like, oh no, we don't want to send our patients to you guys. They just need that jog in memory a lot of the time.
So we've come an awful long way in 5 or 10 years with this. Where does it go next? Like in another 5 or 10 years, what is prehab going to look like? Are we going to be doing a prehab podcast with 20 people working in your team because it's become that important? Like, where does it go? Where does it go in the next 5 or 10 years? This?
I think there's a few sort of directions, and in our service at the moment, we kind of talk about receiving referrals from the CNS and the consultant teams, whether there's been talk of this sort of shift in primary care. So when the GPs perhaps make referrals to the referring hospital where there's a suspicion of cancer, does actually the intervention point perhaps start there?
Yeah.
Is quite possible,
Yeah.
like in the future. And also the way in which we manage patients obviously is on a needs sort of basis, and actually again sort of in line with the NHS long-term plan, it's supporting some of those patients in more community settings, and we're trying really hard at the moment to sort of make relations with universities and other sort of perhaps private-based gyms, and some of these patients actually from a kind of locality and travel point of view is more convenient to be seen if they're appropriate. Don't get me wrong, if they're appropriate patients to be seen in those settings, that's the case. But that's sort of the couple of visions, ideas that I have. I don't know if you guys...
I mean, there's often new treatments that come out that, you know, often can massively decondition patients as well. So as cancer treatment evolves, I'd imagine there would be more scope for prehabilitation in different sort of tumour groups and treatments. So I can see it expanding in that way. And then possibly outside of oncology as well. You know, there's lots of other major surgeries, and they're also equally quite stressful on the body. So you know, I can see prehab saving the NHS quite a bit of money if it was more widely established across lots of different areas.
And hopefully, I think what we're not there yet, but I'm hoping with kind of the recent Macmillan guidelines came up at 2025, which is kind of an overview of the recommendations. But from what I'm hearing, there will be sort of individual papers for each, you know, for nutrition, for exercise, that will provide a bit more guidance of what the services should look like, and that will allow us to sort of align, you know, across the UK, offer more similar services, because there's a lot of prehab services, but with funding constraints, geographic differences, people do things differently. So actually, what is the best way to run prehab so that it's cost efficient, but also from an access point of view, you know, everyone can access it, it's equitable.
Technology as well. Technology. I think it's got a big taste. And
then thinking about adapting it, I guess, for somebody who's going for surgery versus somebody who is maybe on a non-curative sort of chemotherapy. I think that we've got a bit of work to do in terms of, from a provision point of view, what is the optimum, most efficient, but also most effective way, and then that can be replicated, because that's where, you know, we know people need to exercise, we know it works. It's just figuring out the best way to deliver that. Same with like dietitians, but it's so many factors at play. So
let's wrap it up with a couple of top tips then. I want you all to give, you know, one main takeaway from you in your own specific area for someone listening who might be, you know, either thinking that they're not eating right, you know, what can they do differently? They're not exercising enough. You know, they've just cut some surgery coming up. Maybe one big kind of a big takeaway from each of you for a listener that might be relevant. Duncan, you look like you've got one lined up.
I mean, it's got to be walking for like exercise. I mean, it's the most successful thing that most people can do. If they get, I mean, even better if you can walk at like a pace where you're getting a little bit out of breath. So not just like you're shopping, you know, you're pushing your shopping trolley and it's quite casual. Try to think of it as a little bit more intentional, where you're giving a little bit of a push. But if you could get into a walking routine, that's going to give you a really good head start with prehab.
Get your 10,000 steps in.
Well, it doesn't even have to. Well, it doesn't even have to be the 10,000 steps. I often say, you know, if you're, that's a lot of time, 10,000 steps. I'd rather people, you know, work at like a little bit higher intensity, but for less duration, because I think ultimately I think of steps as being good for your health, but maybe not going to get you so fit. Driving up that cardiovascular fitness is really what we're aiming for in prehab.
Every little counts.
But every little bit counts.
Every little counts. Good. Emily?
I'd say, again, from a strength point of view, I think picking just a couple of exercises that are really practical around the home and that fit in with daily life, sort of sit to stands or squats from a chair, doing some wall press ups while you're waiting for the kettle to boil, or those sorts of things, just 2 or 3, doing, you know, as many as you can sort of fit in. It doesn't have to be every single day. It can be sort of 3-4 times a week. But I think for some patients that are still trying to maintain life with their family and elements of work, then just picking a couple of things that is doable to kind of fit in, that can actually make a real difference.
And last but not least, Andriana.
I feel like I've been asked this question so many times and I never have a short answer.
Be well practiced in it then.
Well, what I would say is, I think for people who have been diagnosed recently or going through treatment, if something out there sounds too good to be true, if a certain diet or a food or a supplement is promising you to cure the cancer, or is making too big of a promises, it is probably not true. If we had something like that, we would be shouting it off the rooftops. On the opposite, I would say focus on just maintaining your diet, a healthy balanced diet if you can. But also, if you are struggling, if you're not sure, just ask for some support, because if you can't see a one-on-one dietitian, there will be something else that your nurses can do for you. They can give you a special diet sheet, invite you to a group session. So actually, if you are thinking about following a diet like that, or you're struggling, speak up. Don't go on Google.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for what's been really, really, really interesting 41 and almost 42 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's really exciting.